The whispers started the moment Zelda Vance turned 32, as if her life had somehow ended before it truly began. She stood behind the counter of her late father's general store in Riverside, Wyoming, tallying receipts while pretending not to hear Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Crawford gossiping by the fabric section. Their voices carried despite their attempted discretion, floating through the afternoon air like unwelcome smoke. "Such a shame about the Vance girl," Mrs. Henderson said, running her fingers over a bolt of calico. "All those years caring for her sick father, and now look at her. 32 years old and still unmarried." "Too old for marriage now," Mrs. Crawford agreed with a cluck of her tongue. "What man wants a woman past 30? Her childbearing years are nearly behind her. She had her chances when she was younger, but she chose duty over finding a husband." Zelda's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes on the ledger. She had heard variations of this conversation countless times over the past year, ever since her father passed and left her the store. The women of Riverside, Wyoming seemed to believe that discussing her spinsterhood was their civic duty, as if their opinions might somehow change her circumstances. "Perhaps if she smiled more," Mrs. Henderson continued. "She has such a severe look about her." Zelda closed the ledger with more force than necessary, the sound echoing through the store. Both women fell silent, gathering their chosen fabrics and approaching the counter with false smiles plastered on their faces. "Good afternoon, Zelda dear," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We were just saying how well you run this store. Your father would be so proud." "That will be $2.15, Zelda replied, wrapping their purchases in brown paper without meeting their eyes. She had learned that engaging with their false pleasantries only encouraged more unwanted advice about her personal life. After they left, Zelda allowed herself a long breath. She looked around the store that had been her entire world for the past 8 years. Her father had fallen ill when she was 24, just as she had been courting Benjamin Walsh, the banker's son. But duty called louder than romance, and she had ended the courtship to care for her dying father. Benjamin had married someone else within 6 months. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floorboards. Zelda began closing up for the day, sweeping the floor and straightening merchandise on the shelves. She was reaching to adjust a display of canned goods when the door opened, the bell jingling cheerfully. "We're about to close," she called out, not looking up from her task. "I will make this quick then," a deep voice replied, rough as gravel but somehow warm. Zelda turned and found herself facing the largest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway. His hair was dark brown and hung past his collar, slightly wild as if he had just come down from the mountains. His face was weathered and tanned, with a thick beard that could not quite hide a strong jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a startling shade of gray-blue that reminded her of storm clouds over the mountains. He wore buckskins and furs, clearly a mountain man who had come to town for supplies. His arms, visible beneath rolled-up sleeves, were corded with muscle, and a rifle was slung across his back. "I need supplies," he said, pulling a list from his pocket. "Food, ammunition, rope, and salt." "Whatever you have." Zelda took the list, her professional demeanor snapping into place. "I can fill most of this. Give me a few minutes." She moved through the store efficiently, gathering items and stacking them on the counter. The man watched her work with those intense eyes, making her oddly self-conscious. She was not used to being observed so closely. "You run this place alone?" he asked after a while. "I do. It was my father's store. He passed last year." "That is a lot of work for one person." "I manage just fine," she replied, perhaps more defensively than necessary. She had grown tired of people questioning her capabilities. "I did not mean to suggest otherwise," he said, his tone softening slightly. "I meant it as an observation, not a criticism." Zelda glanced at him, surprised by his perception. Most people in town spoke to her with either pity or judgment, rarely with simple respect. "That will be $18.40, she said, finishing the tally. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch, counting out the exact amount in coins and bills. His hands were large and scarred, the hands of someone who worked hard and lived rough. "I am Marcus Reid," he said as he handed her the money. "I have a cabin up in the mountains about 2 days' ride north of here. I come to town 4 times a year for supplies." "Zelda Vance," she replied automatically, then wondered why she was bothering with introductions for someone she would likely never see again. "Miss or Mrs.?" he asked. The question, which usually irritated her, somehow seemed different coming from him. Not judgmental or pitying, just curious. "Miss," she said, lifting her chin slightly as if daring him to comment. Marcus Reid nodded slowly, those gray-blue eyes still studying her face. "Good to know," he said simply, then gathered his supplies. "I will be back in 3 months. Good evening, Miss Vance." He left without another word, and Zelda found herself standing behind the counter, feeling oddly unsettled by the encounter. She shook her head, dismissing the strange flutter in her chest as simple surprise at meeting someone new. The following weeks passed in their usual rhythm. Zelda opened the store each morning, served customers throughout the day, and closed up each evening. She ate simple dinners in the small apartment above the store, read by lamplight, and fell asleep in the same bed she had slept in since childhood. The whispers about her unmarried state continued, though she tried to ignore them. The town had several bachelors, but none had shown interest in courting a woman her age. The younger women, fresh-faced and giggling, attracted all the attention. Zelda told herself she did not care, that she had made peace with her solitary life. But in quiet moments, she wondered what it might be like to have someone to talk to at the end of the day. Someone who saw her as more than just the spinster who ran the general store. 3 months passed more quickly than she expected. Zelda was restocking shelves on a crisp autumn morning when the door opened and Marcus Reid walked in, looking exactly as he had before, wild and strong and somehow out of place in the civilized confines of her store. "Miss Vance," he greeted her with a slight nod. "Mr. Reid," she replied, surprised that she remembered his name so easily. "Back for more supplies." "That, and I was hoping you might be willing to special order some things for me, books specifically." This caught her off guard. Most mountain men she had encountered over the years were rough types who could barely read. "What kind of books?" "Whatever you think is worth reading. I have read everything I own 5 times over. I do not care much about the subject, just something to pass the winter evenings." Zelda found herself warming to this request. Books were one of her few pleasures in life. "I can order from a supplier in Cheyenne. It will take about 6 weeks for them to arrive." "I will pay in advance," Marcus said. "Whatever you think is good, I will trust your judgment." They discussed logistics and payment, and then Marcus gathered his standard supplies. As Zelda tallied everything up, he spoke again. "There is a new restaurant that opened on Main Street, the Widow Miller's place. Have you eaten there?" "No, I usually eat at home." "Would you consider joining me for dinner this evening?" Zelda's hand stilled on the ledger. She looked up at him, searching for signs of mockery or pity, but found only sincere interest in his weathered face. "Why?" she asked bluntly. Marcus seemed surprised by the question, then thoughtful. "Because I am in town for 2 days, and I would enjoy the company." Because you are the only person in this town who has treated me like a normal customer rather than a dangerous curiosity. And because I would like to know you better." "People will talk," Zelda said, though she was not sure why she was arguing against something she found herself wanting. "Let them talk. Do you want to have dinner with me, Miss Vance?" The direct question deserved a direct answer. "Yes," she said, surprising herself. "Yes, I would." 6 o'clock then. "I am staying at the boarding house. I will come by to collect you." After he left, Zelda stood in the sudden silence of her store, wondering what she had just agreed to. But beneath the nervousness was something else, something she had not felt in years: anticipation. She closed the store at 5:30, giving herself time to change into her best dress, a deep green wool that brought out her hazel eyes. She brushed her dark brown hair, which was still thick and lustrous despite what the town gossip said about her fading looks. At 32, she had a few lines at the corners of her eyes and a maturity to her features that she thought made her look dignified rather than old. Marcus arrived precisely at 6, dressed in clean trousers and a button-up shirt that strained slightly across his broad shoulders. His hair was still long but had been neatly combed, and his beard was trimmed. "You look lovely," he said simply, and she believed he meant it. They walked to the restaurant together, and Zelda could feel the stares following them down the street. By tomorrow morning, the entire town would know that the spinster Zelda Vance had gone to dinner with the mountain man. The restaurant was cozy, with checkered tablecloths and candles on each table. Mrs. Miller, a kind woman who had lost her husband to pneumonia 2 years prior, seated them by the window and took their orders without any visible judgment. "Tell me about your life in the mountains," Zelda said once they were alone. Marcus leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful. "It is quiet. Peaceful. I trap in the winter, hunt year-round, and grow vegetables in the summer. I fish in the streams and chop wood for the fire. It is simple, but it suits me." "Do you ever get lonely?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I prefer solitude to bad company. I spent years working in cities before I came west. Too many people, all of them wanting something from you. In the mountains, the only expectations are the ones I set for myself." "How old are you?" Zelda asked, then immediately felt embarrassed by her boldness. But Marcus just smiled slightly. 38. Old enough to know what I want, young enough to still work hard for it. Their food arrived, roasted chicken with potatoes and vegetables. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing more easily than Zelda had expected. Marcus asked about the store, about her father, about how she spent her days. He listened when she talked, really listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak. "Why have you never married?" he asked finally, the question she had been dreading. Zelda set down her fork. "I was caring for my father. By the time he passed, everyone said I was too old." "Too old," Marcus repeated, his voice edged with something that might have been anger. "What nonsense! I am 32. Most women my age have children nearly grown. And that makes you too old for what? For love. For companionship. For building a life with someone." He shook his head. "Age is just a number, Miss Vance. What matters is whether two people suit each other, whether they can build something together that is better than what they have apart." Zelda felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "That is a lovely sentiment, but reality is different." "Reality is what we make it," Marcus said firmly. "I spent 38 years learning that lesson. I wasted my 20s working jobs I hated, trying to please a family who wanted me to be someone I was not. I wasted my early 30s in a marriage to a woman who married me because I could provide, not because she cared about me. When she died of fever, I realized I had spent my entire life living for everyone else's expectations. So I came west, built a cabin, and decided to live on my own terms." "You were married before," Zelda asked quietly. For 3 years. Her name was Catherine. She was a good woman in many ways, but we did not love each other, not really. We were together because it was expected, because we were the right ages and our families approved. When she died, I mourned her because she did not deserve to die so young, but I did not mourn the marriage. The honesty in his words struck Zelda deeply. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you. But my point is this: you are not too old for anything, Miss Vance. You are exactly the right age to know yourself, to know what you want from life. That makes you more valuable, not less. Zelda had to look away, blinking back tears. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. They finished their dinner and Marcus walked her back to the store. At the door, he took her hand gently. I would like to see you again, he said. When I come back in 3 months for those books, would that be acceptable? Yes, Zelda said, her voice barely above a whisper. I would like that very much. He lifted her hand and kissed it gently, a gesture so old-fashioned and courtly that it made her heart race. Then he was gone, disappearing into the night, leaving her standing in the doorway with her hand still tingling from his touch. The next morning, the gossips descended on her store like locusts. Having dinner with that wild man, Mrs. Henderson said, scandalized. Zelda, what were you thinking? He lives in the mountains like an animal. He is a customer, Zelda replied calmly, and a gentleman. More of one than most men in this town. But he is so rough-looking, Mrs. Crawford added, and at your age you cannot afford to be particular, but surely you could do better than a mountain man. Zelda felt anger rise in her chest, hot and fierce. At my age. You have all spent years telling me I am too old for marriage, and now you criticize my choice of companion. I am 32 years old, and I will have dinner with whomever I please. Good day, ladies. She turned her back on them, a gesture so rude by social standards that both women gasped. But Zelda did not care. For the first time in years, she felt alive, felt like herself rather than the dutiful daughter or the lonely shopkeeper. The weeks passed slowly. Zelda ordered books from the supplier in Cheyenne, choosing carefully. She selected an adventure novel by Jules Verne, a collection of Mark Twain's stories, a volume of poetry, and a history of the American frontier. She hoped Marcus would enjoy the variety. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments, remembering the warmth in his eyes, the strength in his hands, the way he had spoken to her as an equal. She caught herself smiling for no reason, humming while she worked. Winter began to settle over Wyoming, bringing cold winds and the first dustings of snow. Zelda bundled up in warm layers and kept the stove in the store burning hot. She wondered how Marcus was faring in his mountain cabin, whether he had enough firewood, whether he was warm and safe. 6 weeks after his last visit, the books arrived. Zelda unpacked them carefully, running her hands over the covers. She imagined Marcus reading them by firelight, and the image made her smile. But the 3-month mark came and went with no sign of him. Zelda told herself not to worry. He could have been delayed by weather or by good trapping. But as days turned into weeks, worry gnawed at her. Nearly 4 months after his last visit, on a bitterly cold December afternoon, Marcus Reid walked through her door. He looked thinner, and there was a bandage wrapped around his left forearm. Mr. Reid, Zelda said, relief flooding through her. I was worried. I apologize for the delay. I had an unfortunate encounter with a bear. Nothing serious, but it kept me laid up longer than I expected. A bear. Zelda came around the counter, her professional demeanor dropping away. Let me see that arm. It is healing fine. Let me see it, she insisted. Marcus unwrapped the bandage, revealing a series of long scratches that were scabbed over but healing well. Zelda examined them with a practiced eye. She had cared for her father through various ailments and had learned basic medical care. You are lucky it was not worse, she said. "These need to be kept clean. I have salve that will help." She fetched supplies and rebandaged his arm properly, her hands gentle but efficient. Marcus watched her work with an expression she could not quite read. "Thank you," he said when she finished. "The books came in," she said, suddenly shy. "I hope you like what I chose." She showed him her selections, and his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "These look perfect." "How much do I owe you?" They settled accounts, and then Marcus looked at her seriously. "I know it is getting late, but would you consider having dinner with me again? I have missed talking to you." "I have missed talking to you too," Zelda admitted. They returned to the same restaurant, and this time Zelda noticed that the stares from other diners held more curiosity than judgment. She realized she did not care either way. Over dinner, Marcus told her about the bear encounter. He had been checking his trap lines when a mother bear, protective of her cubs, had attacked. He had managed to escape without serious injury, but the wounds had become infected. He had spent 2 weeks in his cabin, fighting fever and weakness. "You could have died," Zelda said, horror washing over her. "But I did not. I am tougher than I look." He tried to make light of it, but Zelda was not amused. "You live alone up there. What if you had been more seriously injured? What if no one had found you?" "I have lived that way for 5 years," Marcus said gently. "It is the life I chose. That does not make it less dangerous." They looked at each other across the table, and Zelda realized with sudden clarity that she cared about this man, cared more than was probably wise given how little time they had spent together. "I have been thinking about you," Marcus said quietly. "Every day since I last saw you. I told myself I was being foolish, that I barely know you, but I cannot seem to help it." "I have been thinking about you too," Zelda confessed. "I am going to be direct because that is my way. I am interested in courting you properly, Miss Vance. I know the obstacles. I live in the mountains, you live in town. I am a rough man with a simple life, you are an established businesswoman. I am 6 years older than you, which some might find inappropriate. But I think we could be good together, if you are willing to try." Zelda's heart pounded in her chest. "The town will talk. They already talk, about both of us. Does their opinion matter more than your own happiness?" "No," Zelda said firmly, "it does not." "Then may I court you?" "Yes," she said, and felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had not even known she was carrying. Marcus smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something warmer. "I return to the mountains tomorrow, but I will come back in 1 month instead of 3. We can take things slowly, get to know each other properly." "I would like that." True to his word, Marcus returned 1 month later in January. The relationship that developed between them was unlike anything Zelda had experienced. When Marcus was in town, they spent every possible moment together. They took walks despite the cold, had dinners, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. Marcus told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his difficult relationship with his father who had wanted him to be a lawyer, his years of drifting before finding his place in the Wyoming mountains. Zelda told him about her mother who had died when she was young, her close relationship with her father, her abandoned dreams of seeing more of the world. "Why did you never leave after your father died?" Marcus asked one evening as they sat in the apartment above the store, drinking tea by the fire. "Fear, I suppose. This store, this town, it is all I know. And where would I go? What would I do?" "You could do anything," Marcus said. "You are smart, capable, strong. The world is bigger than Riverside." "Is that an invitation?" Zelda asked, only half teasing. Marcus set down his tea and took her hand. "Not yet, but perhaps eventually if things continue the way they are going." They shared their first kiss that night, gentle and sweet, and Zelda felt like a young girl again, full of hope and possibility. The months passed in a new rhythm. Marcus came to town every 4 to 6 weeks, staying for several days each time. He helped Zelda with heavy work around the store, repairing a leaking roof, building new shelving, fixing a broken window. She mended his clothes and packed him supplies for his return journeys, including baked goods and preserves. The town gossips eventually tired of their disapproval. A few people even began to see the relationship as romantic rather than scandalous. Mrs. Miller, the restaurant owner, told Zelda she was happy to see her finding love. "You deserve happiness, dear," she said. "Do not let anyone tell you different." Spring came to Wyoming with sudden beauty, the snow melting to reveal green grass and wildflowers. Marcus arrived in April with a proposal that surprised Zelda. "Come to the cabin," he said, "for a visit. I want you to see my life there, to know what it is really like before we take this any further." "I cannot just close the store," Zelda protested. "Why not? For a week. Hire the Mitchell boy to watch it. I checked, he is looking for work." Zelda hesitated. The idea was both terrifying and thrilling. To leave town, to see the mountains, to spend time alone with Marcus in his home. "What will people say?" "Does it matter?" Marcus asked. "We are adults, Zelda. We do not need anyone's permission to live our lives." She made her decision. "I will come." They left 3 days later after Zelda had made arrangements for the store. Marcus had brought a gentle mare for her to ride, and they traveled north into the mountains. The journey took 2 days, and they camped one night under the stars. Marcus was the perfect gentleman, setting up separate bedrolls and keeping a respectful distance. The mountain scenery was breathtaking. Tall pines reached toward blue skies, streams rushed with snowmelt, and wildlife was everywhere. Zelda saw deer, elk, and even a moose. Marcus pointed out animal tracks and named the birds that flew overhead. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "Wait until you see the cabin," he said. They arrived late on the second day. The cabin sat in a clearing beside a rushing stream with mountains rising on all sides. It was larger than Zelda had expected, built from sturdy logs with a stone chimney. A garden plot lay ready for spring planting, and a small barn housed Marcus's horse and supplies. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly cozy. One large room served as living area, kitchen, and bedroom with a sleeping loft above. The furniture was handmade but well crafted. Books lined a shelf on one wall and furs covered the floor and bed. "You built all this yourself?" Zelda asked. "Over several years. It is not fancy, but it is home." Zelda spent a week at the cabin, and it was one of the happiest times of her life. She and Marcus fell into an easy routine. They rose with the sun and spent days working together. She helped him plant the garden while he taught her to fish. They hiked through the mountains, and he showed her his trap lines and the best hunting spots. In the evenings, they cooked together over the fire and read aloud from books. They talked and laughed and grew closer in ways that distance had prevented. Marcus was patient with her inexperience in outdoor living, teaching her skills without condescension. On the last night before they were to return to town, they sat outside the cabin watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I love it here," Zelda said softly. "I never expected to, but I do." "Could you live here?" Marcus asked. Zelda turned to look at him. His face was serious in the fading light, his gray-blue eyes searching hers. "Are you asking me to?" "Not yet. But I am thinking about it. I am thinking about asking you to marry me, Zelda. But I need to know if you could be happy with this life. It is isolated, hard work, long winters. You would be giving up the store, the town, everything familiar." "I would also be gaining something," Zelda said. "Adventure, beauty. A partner who sees me as I really am. You." Marcus pulled her close, wrapping a strong arm around her shoulders. "I want you to be sure. Take your time. Think about it while I am away. We do not have to rush." But Zelda already knew her answer. She had known it for weeks, maybe longer. She loved this man, loved his strength and his gentleness, his honesty and his respect for her. She loved the life he could offer her, so different from what she had known. They returned to Riverside at the end of the week. Zelda went back to running her store, but something had changed. The building felt smaller, more confining. She found herself longing for the open skies and mountain vistas. Marcus came to town 2 weeks later, and Zelda met him at the edge of town on horseback, something that shocked several residents who saw the usually proper Miss Vance in riding attire. They rode out to a meadow outside town where wildflowers bloomed in profusion. Marcus dismounted and helped Zelda down, his hands steady on her waist. "I have been thinking," she said before he could speak, "about your question, about whether I could live in the mountains. And I can. I want to, if the offer is still open." Marcus dropped to one knee right there in the meadow, taking her hand in his. "Zelda Vance, will you marry me? I do not have much to offer except myself and a simple life in the mountains, but I promise to love you, respect you, and stand by you for all my days." "Yes," Zelda said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." He stood and kissed her deeply, and Zelda felt like her life was finally beginning at 32, when everyone had said it was already over. They married 1 month later in a simple ceremony at the church in Riverside. Mrs. Miller and a few other kind souls attended, but most of the town stayed away, still disapproving of the match. Zelda did not care. She wore a simple blue dress and carried wildflowers, and she had never been happier. She sold the store to a young couple newly arrived from the East, using the money to buy supplies for her new life. It was strange, packing up the rooms that had been her entire world, but also liberating. On a warm June morning, Zelda and Marcus rode out of Riverside together, heading north into the mountains. Zelda did not look back. Life at the cabin was everything she had hoped and more difficult than she had imagined. The work was constant and physically demanding. She learned to chop wood, haul water, tend the garden, smoke meat, and dozens of other skills necessary for mountain living. Her hands grew calloused, her body stronger, but she also learned joy she had never known in town. The satisfaction of growing food with her own hands, of cooking over a fire she had built, of falling asleep in Marcus's arms and waking to birdsong. She learned to read weather in the sky, to track animals, to navigate by landmarks and stars. Marcus was a patient teacher and a loving husband. He treated her as an equal partner in all things, asking her opinion and respecting her decisions. When she struggled with a task, he encouraged rather than criticized. When she succeeded, he praised genuinely. They talked for hours in the evenings, continuing to learn about each other. They made love under firs and stars, discovering passion neither had known before. Zelda bloomed in ways she had not thought possible, becoming more herself than she had ever been. Their first winter together was hard. Snow piled high around the cabin, and temperatures dropped brutally low. They spent weeks at a time snowed in, dependent entirely on their stored supplies and each other. But those months also brought a deep intimacy, a profound connection that came from facing hardship together. In the spring, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. At 33, she had thought motherhood might not be possible for her, but her body proved otherwise. Marcus was overjoyed, though also worried about her safety. The nearest doctor was 2 days away in Riverside. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," Zelda reminded him. "I will be fine." And she was. That November, with Marcus's help and her own determination, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Daniel, and he had his father's gray-blue eyes and dark hair. Motherhood in the mountains was challenging but rewarding. Zelda learned to balance caring for a baby with all the other demands of their life. Marcus was a devoted father, taking on extra work so Zelda could rest when needed. Daniel grew into a sturdy toddler, and then into a curious boy who loved exploring the mountains with his father. When he was 3, Zelda gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Sarah. The cabin rang with laughter and noise, and though Zelda was busier than ever, she had never been more content. They made trips to Riverside twice a year, for supplies and to maintain some connection with civilization. Zelda noticed that the town gossips had found new targets for their judgment. A few women even approached her to say they admired her unconventional choice. "You look happy," Mrs. Miller told her on one visit. "Happier than I ever saw you running that store." "I am happy," Zelda confirmed. "Happier than I ever thought possible." When Zelda was 38 and Marcus 44, they had their 4th and final child, another boy they named Thomas. Their family felt complete, their cabin overflowing with love and life. The years passed in the rhythm of seasons. Springs for planting, summers for growing and exploring, autumns for harvesting and hunting, winters for hunkering down together. The children grew, learning the skills they needed to thrive in the mountains. Daniel became an expert tracker like his father. Emma inherited Zelda's love of books and learning. Sarah had a gift with animals. Thomas, the youngest, had a talent for building and fixing things. Marcus and Zelda grew older together, their love deepening with time. The passion of their early relationship matured into something steadier but no less intense, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared work, and genuine affection. When Zelda turned 45, she and Marcus took a rare trip alone, leaving the children with a friendly trapper family for a week. They rode deep into the mountains, to places they had not visited in years. One evening they sat by a campfire under a canopy of stars, much as they had done years before. "You ever regret it?" Marcus asked. "Giving up the store, the town, that life?" "Never," Zelda said firmly. "This is where I belong, with you. I spent so many years being told what I should want, who I should be. You were the first person who let me figure that out for myself." "You were exactly the right age when we met," Marcus said. "Old enough to know yourself, young enough to embrace change." "I am grateful every day that I walked into your store." "They said I was too old for marriage," Zelda remembered. "Too old for love and children and adventure." "They were wrong about everything," Marcus said. "You were exactly the right age for all of it, for me." He kissed her then, tender and loving, and Zelda felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt that first day in the store, when a mountain man with storm cloud eyes had walked into her life and changed everything. They returned to their cabin, to their children and their life. More years passed. Daniel grew up and married a woman from a nearby trapper family, building his own cabin a day's ride away. Emma became a teacher, riding circuit between small mountain settlements. Sarah trained horses and sold them to ranchers. Thomas apprenticed with a carpenter in Riverside but returned to the mountains every summer. Marcus's hair turned fully gray, and Zelda found silver threading through her dark brown hair. They moved a little slower, ached a little more, but their love never diminished. They still worked side by side, still read together in the evenings, still fell asleep in each other's arms. When Zelda turned 55, she became a grandmother for the first time. Daniel and his wife brought their newborn son to meet her, and Zelda held the tiny baby with tears in her eyes, marveling at the continuity of life. "What will you teach him?" Daniel asked, watching his mother with his son. "That age is just a number," Zelda said. "That it is never too late to change your life, to take chances, to choose love over fear. that the world is bigger and more beautiful than most people ever realize. Marcus, now 61 but still strong and vital, put his arm around his wife. "Your mother is the bravest person I know. She gave up everything she knew to come live in these mountains with me." "I did not give up anything," Zelda corrected gently. "I traded one life for a better one, the best one." More grandchildren came over the years. Emma married a schoolteacher and had 3 children. Sarah had twins. Thomas and his wife had a daughter. The cabin saw a steady stream of visitors, and Zelda loved being surrounded by family, by the legacy of the choice she had made so many years ago. She and Marcus still took occasional trips into the mountains, though they did not go as far as they once had. They would camp by streams and watch stars, talking about their life together, their children, their hopes for their grandchildren. "I never imagined this," Zelda said one evening when she was 60. "When I was standing in that store, listening to those women say I was too old for everything, I never imagined I could have all this." "You deserved all of it," Marcus said. "You always did. I just helped you see that." "We helped each other," Zelda corrected. "You were running away from the world when we met, living alone in these mountains, hiding from everything that had hurt you. I helped you open your heart again, too." Marcus pulled her close. "We saved each other. How is that for a story?" It was a good story, Zelda thought. A love story that had started when she was supposedly too old for such things, with a mountain man who saw her worth when no one else did. A story full of hard work and simple joys, of children and grandchildren, of seasons changing and love enduring. As the years continued to pass, Zelda and Marcus aged gracefully in their mountain home. Their children and grandchildren visited regularly, and the cabin became known as a place of warmth and wisdom. Young couples sought their advice. Parents brought difficult children, hoping Marcus and Zelda's example might inspire them. Zelda became known as something of a healer, having learned much about mountain medicine over the decades. When Marcus turned 70 and Zelda 64, they celebrated with all their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin. It was crowded and chaotic and perfect. They ate and laughed and told stories long into the night. Looking around at the faces of her family, Zelda felt overwhelming gratitude. Every line on her face had been earned. Every gray hair represented a year of life fully lived. She was not the frightened, lonely woman running a store in Riverside. She was Zelda Reid, mountain woman, wife, mother, grandmother, and most importantly, herself. Marcus caught her eye across the crowded room and smiled, that same smile that had first captured her heart decades ago. The love in his eyes had not diminished with time. If anything, it had grown deeper, richer, more profound. Later that night, after everyone had left or bedded down in various corners of the cabin and barn, Zelda and Marcus stepped outside. The mountain air was cool and clean, filled with the scent of pine. Stars blazed overhead in impossible profusion. "Thank you," Zelda said softly. "For what? For seeing me. For loving me. For believing I was exactly the right age when everyone else said I was too old." Marcus took her hand, his grip still strong despite his years. "You were always enough, Zelda. You just needed someone to remind you." They stood together in the darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a family in these wild mountains. They had faced hardships and dangers, celebrated triumphs and survived losses. Through it all, their love had been the constant, the foundation on which everything else was built. The years continued their steady march. Marcus remained healthy and active well into his 70s, still hunting and trapping, though he left the harder work to younger men. Zelda continued tending her garden and teaching her grandchildren, passing on the skills and wisdom she had accumulated. When Marcus was 74 and Zelda 68, They took one final journey together, deep into the mountains to a place they had always loved. They camped by a crystal-clear lake, fishing and reminiscing about their years together. "If you could go back," Marcus asked, "would you change anything?" "Not a single moment," Zelda replied without hesitation. "Every choice led me here to this life. I would do it all exactly the same. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, they made the good parts sweeter." They returned home and settled into a peaceful routine. Their days were quieter now, but no less full. They still worked together, though at a slower pace. They still read by firelight and fell asleep holding hands. They still found joy in simple moments: a beautiful sunrise, a grandchild's laughter, a perfectly ripe tomato from the garden. Marcus passed peacefully in his sleep when he was 78, with Zelda beside him. She woke to find him gone, his face relaxed and peaceful. Though grief struck her heart, she was grateful he had not suffered, that he had lived a full life and died in the place he loved most. The funeral was attended by dozens of people, family and friends from across the mountains. They shared stories of Marcus's kindness, his strength, his wisdom. Zelda listened and grieved and felt grateful that so many had known and loved her husband. She continued living in the cabin, refusing her children's offers to move in with them. At 72, she was still capable of caring for herself. Daniel and his family lived close enough to check on her regularly, and her other children visited often. Zelda spent her remaining years surrounded by love. She taught her grandchildren to read and garden. She passed on Marcus's stories and lessons. She wrote down their history, wanting future generations to know how their love had started, how two people deemed too old and too different had found each other and built something beautiful. On a spring morning when she was 78, Zelda passed away quietly in her sleep, in the cabin she and Marcus had called home for over 40 years. Her children found her looking peaceful, a slight smile on her face, a journal open beside her. The last entry in the journal read, "They said I was too old for marriage. Marcus said I was exactly the right age for him. He was right about everything that mattered. I have lived a life beyond my wildest dreams, full of love and adventure and purpose." To anyone reading this who feels too old, too late, too anything, remember that it is never too late to choose love, to take chances, to live fully. Age is just a number. What matters is having the courage to embrace life when it offers you something real. Zelda was buried beside Marcus on a hill overlooking their cabin, with a view of the mountains they had both loved. Their children and grandchildren gathered to remember them, sharing stories of their legendary love, their unconventional choices, their full and beautiful life together. The cabin remained in the family, passed down through generations. It became a symbol of what was possible when two people chose love over fear, when they refused to let society's expectations dictate their happiness. And in Riverside, the story of Zelda Vance and Marcus Reid became legend. The spinster who was too old for marriage and the mountain man who saw her worth. The couple who proved that love has no age limit, that it is never too late to start over, to find your person, to live the life you were meant to live. Their story inspired countless others over the years. Young women who felt past their prime found hope in Zelda's example. Men who felt trapped by expectations found courage in Marcus's choice. Couples facing opposition found strength in knowing that true love could overcome any obstacle. The town eventually grew and changed, as all towns do. But the story remained, passed down through generations, a reminder that the best love stories are the ones where two people see each other clearly, accept each other fully, and choose each other completely, regardless of what anyone else thinks. Zelda had been 32 when Marcus walked into her store, both of them carrying wounds and dreams, both of them searching for something they could not name. She had been told she was too old for love, too old for marriage, too old for new beginnings, but Marcus had seen the truth. She was exactly the right age, old enough to know herself, brave enough to take chances, wise enough to recognize real love when it appeared. Their story was not a fairy tale. It was better because it was real. Full of hard work and simple joys, challenges overcome and dreams fulfilled, a love that grew stronger with time rather than fading. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy they left behind. Not just their children and grandchildren, though those were precious, but the proof that it is never too late. That age is just a number, that true love sees past superficial concerns to the heart of what really matters. Zelda Vance Reid lived 78 years. The first 32 were a prelude. The next 46 were the real story, the life she was always meant to live, with the man who saw her for exactly who she was and loved her all the more for it. They said she was too old for marriage. Marcus said she was exactly the right age for him. And in that moment, everything changed. One simple truth, spoken by a mountain man with storm cloud eyes, gave a lonely woman permission to dream again, to hope again, to live again. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.